Yeah. The promenade, the people walking, the people talking, facade, what do you want?
Hi everyone, my name is Kaori. I'm from Tokyo, Japan. And I'm studying global public health and policy in Queen Mary University. And my background is physiotherapist in Japan. The reason I wanted to involve this project seed is drug policy is really unfamiliar thing in Japan. And even worse, maybe just talking about that kind of topic is recognized as a taboo. So learning about drug policy area and how to make a conversation with people is really good opportunity to me as a Japanese person. So that's why I decided to involve here.
Hello, everyone. My name is Maddie Starks. I am a recent graduate from Queen Mary. I studied global health, and my background is in international politics. Um, so I'm I'm very pleased to be working with the Seeds group on this project. Um, I think drug policy and harm reduction change is so important, and it affects so many people, and there's not enough people involved in the conversation. So it's great to be here. Today we're talking with Jason Reed from Leap UK. And yeah, thank you for joining us. So the first question we have for you is, how did you get into drug policy and harm reduction work?
So I think my journey's been strange. It's certainly been taxing. Um, I've essentially had a lifelong illness. It's called ME, and right from the word go, when I was diagnosed at 8, and I'm now 41, which I don't know where the time's gone. But when I was diagnosed, it was very much a case of just get on, manage it. And what ME does, it's creates this massive pain bubble for the sufferer. So it constantly feels like I want to disown my skeleton and my muscles. And when you're in that state 24/7, you obviously need alleviation. So from an early age, I was on opiates. They prescribed opiates from the age of about 10, which of course we now know we need to be a bit vigilant with the way that we dish out opiates. And then that went on right until I was mid 20s. And then that's when my health started to break down again. I have these patterns of managed to build and then relapse, build and relapse. So at that point, someone suggested, have you thought about cannabis? And I was one of those child of the 80s of just say no, generation Nancy Reagan, very much influenced by the all drugs are bad, gateway theory, and all of that. So I was completely ignorant. And of course, I had the prescription drug legacy as well. So some of the drugs that I got prescribed, some turned me blind, some um, made me get inflammation to such a degree that you couldn't even see what limb I had. There was some hideous prescribed legacies. So when someone said, try this illicit one over here that you've heard all these bad things about that causes schizophrenia, I was so skeptical. But eventually I did. I did my research and I thought, well, I'll try it. And it was Dr. Lester Grinspoon that was one of the main influences for me that changed my mind of, well, maybe this isn't quite as bad as what I've been led to believe. And Dr. Grinspoon, sadly passed away now, but I think he is always going to go down in history as one of the pioneers of this for so many reasons. So after I did try a small dose of cannabis, it had such a positive effect on me, both in terms of physical health, but also emotional health, because when you're locked in this battle of wellness, it can get overwhelming. Am I ever going to feel normal? Am I ever going to feel like I can go out there and do this, that, and the other? And I know that my circumstances are going to be limited to what the average normal person is going to be like, but I still managed to do what I do on my terms. So when I found this enabler in cannabis, I was very much like, well, where have you been all my life? Why have I not had the correct information to this? So that led me down the rabbit hole of finding out more and more and more. And that's when the wider aspect of drug policy just opened up. I very much learned quickly that if I wanted to take this issue on, it wasn't just about cannabis, it was about drug policy. So that's where I decided, right, let's get involved in this. So I started picking away at a few different things. And then that all started around about 2009, 2010. So I think this year possibly marks my 10th year, maybe 11th in proper drug policy, like really getting down to it and seeing how it goes. And that was my route in. So cannabis is a gateway drug, but I think it's a gateway drug into finding out more information, finding out the truth behind what's going on in drug policy.
So could you tell us why specifically you find drug reform so important?
Yeah, that's a big question, isn't it? Because I genuinely think that there are some issues in the world that we all deal with that affect every single one of us. And I think that, certain things like the apartheid, it goes about saying that that affected everyone globally in one sort of way or the other, as did segregation, and as we do. And we're still not there yet, as we probably all know, with just general race awareness and just diversity in general. I come from a disability background, so I know that diversity isn't there in disability, and I certainly think other people can speak on my behalf on how BAME communities aren't properly represented. So not only are you dealing with that, but I also think in terms of street violence, in terms of even in terms of international stability, because we're finding out more and more, and we knew this from a while ago anyway, that narco-terrorism is terrorism. We know that everybody that is involved in terrorist organisations, I believe, I've not watched it yet, but there's a Netflix documentary called Seaspiracy, which is about the fishing industry and how that's tied up with the drug war in its own ways. The people that are trafficking fish are also the ones that are doing drug trafficking. And we certainly know from certain coups that happen internationally. So I interviewed recently Stanley Nelson, who did the Netflix documentary Cracked. He goes into how the massive, great spider web of the crack epidemic of the 80s was intertwined with, poverty, social issues, race again. But also there was the international coup in Nicaragua, which essentially the CIA was wrapped up in, and it's a big web that I very much recommend people go and watch the film to dissect it. But this is where all of the different threads of the drug war come back to the same thing, which is prohibition. If you make something illegal, the value goes up. Who gets control of that value? That's where it all spills out. So you've got it on street level, you've got it on international level, you've got it on terrorism levels. And this is where the people that I work with, which I'm sure we'll get into in a minute, is just a fascinating group of people, because I work with an organisation of police and law enforcement voices. Some of them are military intelligence. Every single one of them can pick away at a thread to how the drug war affects them, their service, and us as individuals in society. And that's where I think the average person that doesn't care about drug policy doesn't quite understand, is that you're affected, you just don't know how you're affected yet. And if you're not affected directly, then you're quite a lucky person, because goodness knows there are so many people out there that are being affected right now as we speak.
I wanted to ask about a podcast. After I became the part of this project, I started listening to a podcast, and it was really eye-opening as a Japanese, because most of our population are not familiar with drug policy, more than we just stigmatize the drug is totally worse. So it's kind of taboo even talking about that topic. So I want to ask about, in terms of the people who live in the culture which is not familiar with drug, what role the podcast or media things does have, or what can you do against that kind of population?
Yeah, that's a genuinely fascinating question, because we have found that people in the Eastern Asia have got this the worst with regards to drug policy. It's certainly, I don't suppose I need to mention the Philippines. And this is something that we've addressed quite a lot is the Philippines. And as you'll be able to speak better than I on what's going on in Japan, but it does seem that you can't even have the conversation. We're quite lucky that we can get ourselves out there and have these chats. But one of the things that I think that is quite a useful tool is you can talk about drug policy without actually talking about drug policy. So if the way that we've constructed the podcast and just, you know, a podcast is basically your own broadcast, you know, it's your own cropped radio show, and you can do whatever you want with it. And that's where we're lucky, because we're on a good network. We can get out to the entire globe, and we do get a global audience. I can see the breakdown of our numbers, and we're biggest in the UK and the United States, but we get so much traffic from Malaysia, Mongolia, Japan, Philippines, the Philippines specifically, because of what's going on with the president out there, which extrajudicial killings are still happening. So I feel so passionate for the people that are on those front lines, because their physical and emotional journey within this is one that's very, very hard. And I recommend that, yeah, you can have these conversations without even flagging up drug policy. So, for example, because there are so many different offshoots to drug policy, take on specific small bits. So stop and search in this country, police have got the powers to pull anybody over in a queue and go, right, you're under suspicion of carrying a drug, we're going to pat you down, and we're going to search you. You can address that, and you don't even need to flag up drug policy, because that is an issue in its own right. Even though it does connect, it's still on its own merits. And it's the same with one of the things we're addressing in America at the moment, and this hasn't been released yet, but I've just interviewed Ben and Jerry. And yeah, of all the people that I've interviewed presidents, I've interviewed billionaires, and it's Ben and Jerry were the people that I completely lost my mind for the most. And one of the things that they're doing is to end qualified immunity. So in the United States, as you would have seen in the news, there's been some absolutely hideous incidents of people losing their lives to the police. One of the things that they're protected by in America is qualified immunity. So if you're a professional or I believe even an official or a politician, you can basically get away with crime, and you can kind of get away with murder. So one of the things that they're addressing is, how do you make sure that people are held to account? If you do commit a crime, if you do kill someone, how do you make sure they get a proper trial and a proper hearing? These are all different ways in which are connected to the drug laws, but you don't have to address drug policy specifically. So that you can be very covert about this without flagging up the word drugs, because as soon as you hit the word drugs, there are certain communities that straight away do recoil. So let's make sure that we do address the individual composite parts of the stories and get them fleshed out without necessarily connecting it to the drug war if it's a sensitive area, subject, or demographic.
Thank you very much. It is really, really important point that just at the start, let's make a conversation place and get involved the people, not just focusing on drug policy. So it's really, yeah, thank you very much.
And that's also key as well. Bring in people. There are so many different ways in that you can bring in people from this, whether it's celebrities, whether it's musicians, politicians. You can borrow, and that is so important, because every time you do get a new person, you've got their audience. And that's what we've done within the UK, is how can you spread that out further by bringing in all these different people.
Thank you very much.
Right in front of me, you talk to you.